I recognize Douglas Oles, Chair, to present the report of the Constitution and Canons Committee.
After the inspiring example of the Bishop's Cross recipients, after the moving experience of the 4 ordinands to the diaconate whom you joined with this morning, many here would appreciate a moment of thoughtful reflection and of faith. But this is not that moment. This is the report of the Diocesan Convention on Constitution and Canons, your guardians of fine print. And in case you didn't know that you needed guarding, you need gardening too, check page 8 of this morning's ordination service, and you will find there that in the version of the Nicene Creed that you were led like sheep into repeating, that the words "and the Son" were deleted from the reference of the source of the Holy Spirit, a clear influence of a secret agent from an Orthodox faith. But never fear, we are watching. And thanks to your misplaced vote, I have now managed to achieve sufficient seniority at the National Church level to be on the National Committee or the General Convention Committee on Canons. And if I had time, which I have not been given, I could tell you about all kinds of wonderful commas and defined terms that we've been able to inject into the General Convention canons. Those who are interested can see me afterwards. But, you know, there are things about General Convention that also involve words that come back to all of us. I'm sure you've all heard the reports. There was this year a proposal that the National Church should appropriate $8 million to create a committee that would then open the prayer book for potential revision. And that proposal passed the House of Deputies, and there were a number of ideas of how that might be done. So, for example, in the Lord's Prayer, where it says, "Give us this day our daily bread," you could insert a footnote about allowing for a gluten-free substitute. And where we ask the Lord to save us from the time of trial, there would be an exception for the lawyers, keeping in mind that for them it's just making a living. But the really inspiring thing about the National Church this year, the General Convention, is our new presiding bishop, who honestly is an amazing person. And some of you may have heard that 3 years ago at General Convention there was a resolution passed calling on Queen Elizabeth of England, Queen Elizabeth, to make a public apology for the fact that her Tudor ancestor Henry VII had signed a charter in 1496 that authorized John Cabot the Explorer to convert the heathen in a new world. Almost 3 years passed with the new General Convention approaching, and strangely, Queen Elizabeth had not yet apologized. But then the perfect occasion came. It was the royal wedding. And amazingly enough, our presiding bishop was invited, and he was there not only just on British TV, but the whole world was watching. And it was the perfect moment. He was just a few meters away, and the person being married was actually named Henry, just like Henry VII 500 years earlier. And people were standing by, ready to go. You may have seen Elton John there. Elton John had prepared in advance that as soon as she apologized, he would jump up and play "Sorry Seems to Be the Hardest Word." Okay, we're dating ourselves, everybody that laughed at that. And as the presiding bishop went on, people were a little concerned because the handlers hadn't allowed quite that much time. We were running short. The Duchess of Cornwall was already lost on another topic. The Prince of Wales was already talking to his dad about the Ascot races. The George Clooney celebrity welcome words had to be canceled from the program. And still it went on, and we were waiting, some people were waiting, for the presiding bishop to do that, to just take it to the Queen and say, "Your Majesty, Betty." Because, you know, at a certain high level of ecclesiastical authority, they're allowed to address royalty by the first name. So now's the time to apologize, as we asked you at this convention in 2015. But as a sign of his wisdom, our presiding bishop passed on that perfect opportunity. And somehow the Anglican Union and its peace was preserved. So these are the things that words and prudence can accomplish. This afternoon, you too can use your words, or more importantly, your voting cards, to achieve and preserve that same kind of Anglican unity. In our report, 18E1, the first thing in the report is the first vote of a change to the Constitution in Article 2. And if you know, they have to be voted on separately by orders. And if you remember, if you're going to change the Constitution, it has to be approved at 2 consecutive conventions of this diocese. So this is the first vote, so don't worry about voting for this because you'll get another chance a year later anyway. You will need to use these things. The green card you will need in order to vote on the committee's recommendations. And as I always point out, the red card is available in case any amendments are proposed from the floor. This amendment to Article 2 simply removes an inaccurate historic reference to the name of the Constitution and Canons, because we no longer call them the National Constitution and Canons because actually the Episcopal Church goes beyond our nation. It extends into Haiti and Ecuador and a number of other places, even more faithful than ourselves. So if you could, we propose that you adopt in each order separately this amendment to Article 2.
Thank you. It's on the floor. It doesn't need a second. Are there any discussion? I see none. We have to vote by orders, so we will do laity first. All in favor in the laity of this? Green cards. Red cards for no. It passes that order. Clergy, all in favor, green cards. Red for no. Passes that order. It passes the first vote.
Thank you very much. Now we get to the second vote on a change to the Constitution that was already approved last year, and since it was approved last year, you don't really have to give it a lot of thought this year. This one is a change to Article 7 of the Constitution, which arises from the fact that there was a conflict between the canons and the Constitution as to how many people it takes whether the lay members of the convention needed to be equally balanced between men and women. And there are some congregations where there is a great imbalance between men and women anyway, and so that particular requirement was posing an inconvenience for them, and that is why this change is being made. So we ask for a second approval of the change to Constitution Article 7.
Okay, change to Constitution Article 7's on the floor. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, laity, all in favor, green cards. Opposed, red. Passes that order. Clergy, all in favor, green cards. Okay, opposed, red. Passes that order. Passes second reading.
The only other change is a series of changes to Canon 26. Canon 26 is one that deals with ecclesiastical discipline, the discipline of priests. It's one that we fortunately have had only very rare need to use in this diocese. And of course, we don't have any canon about the discipline of lay people because that would be virtually impossible. But this is a series, and those of you who've been following this report eagerly from year to year will notice that we're nearing the end now of a 20-year cycle, which has taken us to go canon by canon from the beginning till the end, proposing equally vital amendments to each one of them. And as we get past this, the bishop's going to have to make a decision where we go from here. Maybe we'll come back and start undoing all the things we've done in the past. But in any event, this is kind of a historic moment, these edits to Canon 26, but I think you'll find that they're not that exciting. For example, Section 1 simply says that capitalized terms in the canon will have the meanings that are set forth in the canons of the General Convention. The reason for that is otherwise we would have to insert all kinds of definitions in to duplicate those ones from the General Convention canons. So this is simply an incorporation, and one of our goals is to make things shorter. We want to shorten everything except my talk at this annual diocesan convention. In Section 2 is kind of a clarification about the input that is supposed to be received before a member of the disciplinary board is removed by the bishop, which so far I don't believe has ever happened, but it's always nice to provide for it. And Section 3 is a procedure for dealing with what happens if there is perceived to be undue bias by somebody on one of these disciplinary boards. And we sat around talking about this, as we do with beer and pizza, and we said, well, what is undue bias? Does that mean that due bias is acceptable? So we thought that actually just bias would probably be enough, so we took that out. And then we also clarified at the end that if people get removed because of bias or if they're put on suspension, that the bishop doesn't necessarily get to replace the entire committee, the entire board, he only replaces enough people so that you have a voting quorum. That's the clarification that's there in Section 3. Section 4 had some language in it which was historical, dating back to the time it was enacted. It had dates in 2011 which are no longer relevant, so it gives us a great chance to shorten the canon. There was a requirement for education and training, but it never said who would do that, and our diocesan chancellor was kind enough to agree that she was willing to do that, at least for the time being, so we have now added that clarification. In Section 7, there was a statement saying that the person who was a church attorney, and I understand that you made a really rotten decision on that yesterday, there was language that said that it need not reside in the diocese. Now, actually, the current one does reside in the diocese, but the point is, think of all the other things that it need not do. Need not be a vegetarian. Need not think that the filioque clause needs to be in the. So anyway, the point is, we decided rather than listing all the things that they need not be, that we could just save a few words there on that one. Section 8 is one that talks about, it adds to the list of people who are not supposed to serve as advisors. Advisors are people that assist the various parties in a disciplinary proceeding. There can be one for the complainant and one for the responding party who's being accused of something. There's one of the positions that exists but was not covered by the canon is assistant chancellor, so that is now added to the list. And there's also a sentence at the end reminding everyone that they're entitled to retain an attorney to assist in a proceeding in case they didn't know that already. And of course, as attorneys, we like to put that sentence in virtually everywhere. In Section 9, there was a sentence that used to say that the board shall appoint a board clerk. Well, of course, if the board's appointing it, there's obviously going to be a board clerk, so that was a word we could save. But we also thought maybe that was not necessarily always true, because maybe not everything requires appointing a clerk. It's so hard to get clerks. I mean, hands, how many people here want to be board clerk? So rather, we want to only kind of call for them when you need to them. And then in 10, we added about, in the list of people whose expenses get reimbursed, one of them is the advisors, because somebody just forgot them before. There can be an advisor for each side. So again, this is kind of just covering that detail. In Section 11, since we took board clerk out earlier, here we decided we'd put it in for balance. But that's because here, you do need to know which clerk you're talking about, because it's not identified earlier in the sentence. There's actually method to this madness. In Section 12, we changed a reference to the canons of the General Convention, because there it was capitalized saying general canons. There are no such canons. General canons are canons owned by a general, which has nothing to do particularly with our Episcopal Church. And then in Section 13, there is a reference. We used to say telephone or other electronic communications. And of course, the telephone part went back to Alexander Graham Bell, but there are now so many bewildering numbers of electronic communications, we thought we'll just use a general word instead of favoring one over the other, although I personally still favor the telephone. So that is the list of sort of tinkering amendments that we have to Canon 26, and I propose them all for your consideration.
All right, thank you. These are the changes before you for Canon 26. It's open for discussion. Seeing none, still vote by orders. Laity, green cards for in favor. Red cards opposed. Passes that order. Clergy, green cards for those in favor. Red cards for opposing. It passes that order. It passes.
When our dear presiding bishop passed on the opportunity to call on Queen Elizabeth for a public apology, he instead talked about the love of Jesus. And the love of Jesus, as we know, surpasses all words, even though some of us are sort of attached to words. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Constitution and Canons Committee.